The Buffalo Bills finished the 2023 season with an 11-6 record and made the playoffs for the 5th straight year. And unfortunately for the Bills and their fan base, their season ended before they could get to the Super Bowl. And unfortunately for the Bills, their season ended with a loss to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs for the 3rd time in 4 years. It was a tough end of the 2023 season for the Bills, and this offseason represented what every NFL team goes through in today's era, and that's a roster reset. The Bills have been pushing hard for a Super Bowl since they had acquired Stefon Diggs back in March of 2020, and in Diggs' first year with the team, they went from a team that went 10-6 with a young athletic quarterback to a team with a legitimate MVP candidate at quarterback paired with a receiver who would lead the league in receiving yards. That 2020 season really changed things for Buffalo, and they've consistently been one of the best teams in the NFL since. But not every team lasts forever, and the NFL is a business. And the Bills had several veterans leave the team this offseason, whether it was due to trade, their contract expiring, or flat out getting released. And this put Buffalo in a tough situation because internally, they think they are a Super Bowl contender. And with this much change to the roster in one offseason, I think it's going to be very tough for them to get there this year. And that puts the Bills between a rock and a hard place, because the question is, how far will they go? Well, we're going to break everything down in today's video. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by breaking down the Bills' offseason departures and offseason acquisitions prior to the NFL draft. What I want to preface this part with is the Bills have the second most dead money out of any NFL team prior to the 2024 season. They have over $61 million in dead money, and what this means is they are paying $61 million to players who are not going to be playing for the Bills this season. And for reference, the bottom 4 teams in the NFL all have between $6.2 and $8.6 million in dead cap, so every team is going to pay some sort of dead cap money every year, but when you have nearly a quarter of your team's salary cap and dead money before the players even take a snap, well, you are going to be limited as to what you are going to be able to do, and you are going to be behind the 8 ball before the season starts. Period. And a big reason why the Bills are stuck between a rock and a hard place is because they had 2 options heading into this year. Either try and continue to roll with what has not been working in each of the past few postseasons, or to let the pricey veterans go and try again, not rebuild, but reload. And in all fairness to the Bills, what they have been doing over the past few years has been working. It just, stinks that they are in the middle of a literal dynasty, and unfortunately they aren't the team winning 3 Super Bowls in 5 years. But they have been doing everything right over the past few years. The bill just eventually comes due, and players like Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Stefon Diggs, and Mitch Morse either get old, want too much money, or are being paid too much money, and the guarantees from their contract are up, so they inevitably get released, or in one player's case, essentially force your way out of town. But for reference, this team is paying Stefon Diggs $31 million in 2024, and they're also paying Tre'Davious White $6.2 million to, again, not play for the team. Naturally, this is going to limit what you can spend in free agency, and the Bills' biggest free agent signing was bringing in Curtis Samuel from the Commanders, who signed a 3-year, $24 million contract to play for the Bills. They didn't really do too much in free agency aside from bringing in Curtis, as they technically brought back Mitch Trubisky, who spent the last 2 years with the Steelers, and also brought in veteran defensive tackle Austin Johnson. They also brought in some depth pieces, but this offseason was about trying to replace players that previously played for the team, meaning Buffalo, and this offseason was an example of what the financial cost is when going for a championship. Now, just because the Bills don't have a lot of players that played for them for several years, like the Hydes, the Poyers, and the Morses of the world, does not mean they are automatically done before the season starts. This team finished 6th in points per game last year offensively, and they finished 4th in points allowed per game defensively, and they, again, will be one of the better teams in football. It's just going to look a little different. Unfortunately for the Bills, they have sustained a few injuries already, and the biggest is with linebacker Matt Milano. Milano was a 5th round pick back in 2017 and has been a great player for the Bills over the years. He was a first-team All-Pro back in 2022, and unfortunately Milano had a season-ending injury in Week 5 of the 2023 season when he suffered a season-ending fractured leg in a game against the Jags. As of the time I record this, in August of 2024, Milano suffered a torn bicep and is currently out indefinitely. Obviously, that's a tremendous loss to the Bills' defense, but the one thing I will say about this loss is it happened in August and not a week before the playoffs start, and not only that, but Milano was injured early last year, and they had nearly 3/4 of the season to play without him and get used to him not being there. That is, of course, not to diminish the player Matt Milano is, as much as it is to say they are not entirely doomed because he suffered a major injury. Now, to go back to the Bills' free agent moves or even cutting former players, I do think the worst thing to happen to this franchise over the past few years was Von Miller tearing his ACL back in 2022 against the Lions. I had no problem when the Bills signed Von to a 6-year, $120 million contract because of the way the contract was structured. 51 of the 120 was guaranteed, and the reality of this deal was it was always going to be a 3-year contract, or at least 3 years, and then take it on a year-by-year basis from there. The plan was for Buffalo to win a Super Bowl during one of the first 3 years, preferably in the first year, but unfortunately a lot of things went sideways. There's no chance the Bills pay a then 38-year-old Von Miller in 2027 $32.6 million when he can be cut after this season and save the franchise $17.5 million, and this is per overthecap.com. The reason we bring this up is because Von has the second highest cap hit on the team this year, only behind Josh Allen. And Von looked anything but himself when he came back last year, which was discouraging for the team moving forward. Anytime a player suffers a major injury, it obviously sucks, but I feared the worst when Von tore his ACL because this was going to be a 34-year-old edge rusher who relies on his explosiveness and twitch as an athlete to get off the ball and to get home to the quarterback. And unfortunately, Von was nowhere close to the Von Miller we've seen for so many years last year, and I expect that to carry over at 35 years old this year. But the good news for Buffalo is pass rusher Greg Rousseau has produced at a rate close to what you would want Von to produce, especially within the last year. Rousseau had over 50 pressures last year, and Greg has always been a good player. It's just about maturing in the league and continuing to get reps in with time. Greg had a career-high 8-sack season back in 2022, and while he only had 5 in 2023, he had a career-high in pressures last year, even more than he had in 2022, despite the decrease in sacks. I truly think this will be Greg's big breakout year, and I think the Bills are going to have conversations about how much to pay him 1 year from now. And AJ Epinesa is a solid second rusher, as he is quietly working on back-to-back 6.5 sack seasons, and will play this year at just 26 years old, so there is absolutely a reality where he plays for this franchise for the next several years. The big thing with this edge group is, will Von be a serviceable player this year, or will he continue to age and be a shell of the player he was even during his first season with the Bills just 2 years ago? Now, expecting Von to be a 2012 or 2013 Von at this point is not realistic, but if he can be a good third rusher, then I like this unit a lot more and have a lot more confidence in them than I currently do. I like Rousseau for who he is as a player, but I do have some concerns with this group entering the year. Now, for the secondary, I do not worry about this unit, or should I say, starting unit. If you want to get nitpicky and talk about their 4th or 5th corner, then be my guest, go for it. But most teams' 4th or 5th corners, believe it or not, are not going to magically be a first-team All-Pro somewhere else, and that they're just buried on the depth chart. Can it happen? Yes, of course, but my point is I like the trio of Rasul Douglas, Christian Benford, and one of the most underrated players in all of football, and Buffalonians especially know this, Taron Johnson. Now, if you want to have the what-if injury discussion, then I can't stop you, but I like the secondary, and I don't think they are doomed by the losses of Tre'Davious White and the safety duo of Hyde and Poyer, and especially Tre'Davious, who has unfortunately dealt with multiple lower body injuries over the past few years. Ed Oliver has developed into a really, really good player along the defensive line and had a career-high 9.5 sacks last year, as well as over 60 pressures, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if Ed and Greg combined for 20 sacks this year. I like this defense a lot, and they are going to be a very difficult unit to score on even in the loaded AFC. And I think that's lost within most outlooks for the 2024 Bills, is their defense finished top 4 in points allowed per game last year, despite their quarterback throwing 18 interceptions and throwing them out of countless games. And that will transition us to discuss the 2024 Buffalo Bills offense, and the joke behind Josh Allen throwing this team out of countless games is that he threw 18 interceptions last year, and the big thing when arguing with people online is that they will point to Josh's interceptions and act like he is one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. And it's pretty funny when that's brought up because there's almost no context around Josh's interceptions. A lot of the time when Josh throws an interception, it's something along the lines of 4th and 4 on the opposing 42-yard line, and Josh will take a deep shot, and instead of the team getting the ball at the 42-yard line, it'll be a touchback because Josh is going for a touchdown, which in turn is a plus 22-yard difference for the Bills, despite it showing up on the stat sheet as an interception. So I do want to clear the air here. I don't have any concerns with Josh throwing interceptions, and I think that that is entirely overblown. But pertaining to the 2024 Bills offense, I have a couple of concerns, and it's not with the wide receivers. It's more of the wide receiver depth. I think Khalil Shakir and I think Keon Coleman will be good for the Bills in 2024. And I've seen a lot of people online also say, well, Keon Coleman can't separate, and we're using preseason games to justify this, to have these predetermined thoughts that Keon Coleman's going to be a draft bust, as if Josh Allen's somehow not going to be able to get him the football and that Keon Coleman is doomed before his career starts. No. Now, I do have some concern with the depth, whether it's Mac Hollins, whether it's Marquez Valdes-Scantling, whether it's anybody beyond the wide receiver really 2, and I don't think Curtis Samuel is all that good of a player, but I mean, this offense is going to be one of the best units in the league, and it's due in large part to number 17. Now, there is this big idea that because Stephon Diggs was traded, that there's going to be no way to be able to replace him. But I think Dalton Kincaid takes a big step this year, and I really think there's a good chance that Dalton Kincaid goes for over 1,000 yards, and even Khalil Shakir for that matter too. We did a video earlier this summer, and Khalil Shakir was one of my breakout players within the video, and Khalil had 39 receptions on just 45 targets last year, and he is a very, very solid player, and I think there's going to be, or I think there's a high chance that there's 3 receivers north of 700 yards in this offense, which of course would be Khalil, Keon, and of course Dalton Kincaid. And with Dalton Kincaid not being Sam Laporta, given the rookie year Sam Laporta had, some people either aren't aware or just conveniently forget the type of rookie year Dalton Kincaid had. He finished top 10 in tight ends in yards last year, which for any rookie is really good. Now, obviously, Kincaid had 10 touchdowns and was a very good player for the Lions, but Dalton Kincaid had a really good rookie year too. Also, James Cook is a very good running back, and I really like the rookie running back they selected from Kentucky, Ray Davis, and all in all, this team is going to be difficult to stop. And what also has to be remembered is Josh Allen is one of the best dual threats in the entire league. So when you have a team that has, again, an MVP candidate year after year at quarterback, a good running back, a really good tight end, and one of the best left tackles in football that is really never brought up in discussions amongst offensive linemen and Deion Dawkins, I have no reason to think that the Bills' offense isn't going to be great again in 2024. I don't think the loss of Stephon Diggs, especially as a player who didn't have a 100-yard game past Week 7 last year, and to be honest, I was never a Gabe Davis fan, I don't think the losses of those 2 players is going to be detrimental to the point where Buffalo is not going to be able to overcome that this year. I would be pretty surprised, barring major injury of course, if this team doesn't finish in the top 8 or 9 in points per game this year. They're going to be fine. I think they are a unit that is entirely overthought, and the projection for this team from a stat standpoint is always going to be tough because you might have Josh rush for 15 touchdowns like he did last year. You might have him rush for 6 touchdowns. Now, Dalton Kincaid only had 2 touchdowns last year. Again, obviously when your quarterback rushes for 15, it's going to take away from his numbers. So, not going to really project any true numbers because that would be insanely difficult, and it's honestly a flip of the coin. I don't know how it's going to play out. The best analyst, whoever you think that is, doesn't know how it's going to play out, and I honestly don't think Josh Allen knows how it's going to play out at this point. But what I will say is I think Josh Allen will be over 40 total touchdowns again, and we don't know the ratio of how that's going to play out, but Josh Allen is going to be an MVP candidate, like always, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if he won the MVP this year. This is a very good unit, and they're going to be able to run the ball, and they're going to be able to pass the ball a lot better than some people think, and they're going to be a very good offense. This unit is being entirely overthought, and I'm here saying, do not overthink it. The Bills are going to be a very solid team. The 2024 Bills draft class is going to rely a lot on the success of Keon Coleman at the NFL level, but I think Keon is going to be a good player for a long time. The player that reminded me most of Keon in the draft process from a playstyle standpoint was former NFL receiver Anquan Bolden, and I think Keon is that big-bodied, tough guy that's not afraid to go across the middle, and I think that's going to be especially critical in Buffalo's offense. Now, there's going to be times during Keon's rookie season, and especially early on, and we've already seen that in the preseason, where people are going to clip plays where Keon is the 4th read in the progression, and they're going to clip it and say, man, Keon can't get separation. I knew he was going to be a draft bust because of all these reasons. And it's going to be frustrating at times. And Bills fans, I empathize with you guys for what you're going to go through when people want to push their agendas for Keon Coleman or against Keon Coleman. But he's going to be a good player for a long time, and I think he will go for over 700 yards in his rookie year. He's a great personality. He's a great dude, and I really can't wait to see how he does, not just this year, but in multiple years and beyond. And it was also good to have a good receiver on the rookie contract, and that also applies to their 2nd round pick safety Cole Bishop. Cole was drafted in a lot of ways to try and be the tight end eraser, and again, there's a team that has beat the Bills in 3 of the past 4 years that has a really good tight end, but there's other good tight ends in the conference as well, like Mark Andrews for reference, and even Evan Ingram on the Jags, who is a pass-catching machine if you haven't been paying attention to him, and I think Cole will be a solid player at the NFL level. For me, Cole was slightly overdrafted, but if he becomes a good player, nobody's going to remember that I had him around the 80th or 90th best player, and he was drafted at the end of the 2nd round. So I think he will be an okay player for Buffalo, just slightly overdrafted. Now, again, I really liked the Ray Davis pick. I think Ray will provide a lot of depth, or not a lot of depth, but just he can take the workload off James Cook if James is, in a 22-23 carry game, and he can balance that out. That way James can be a really effective runner late in the season, and I like the potential of Ray Davis as an RB2 a lot. Now, my favorite pick for the Bills draft class in terms of value was pass rusher Javon Solomon. I think Javon has the potential to be a 20 or 25 pressure guy in his rookie year, and I liked his game a lot, and I thought he was a really underrated player throughout the draft process. So if he can be that 4th guy behind, of course, Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, and then even, opposite of Vaughn, I like Javon Solomon a lot. And overall, I like this Bills draft class. They obviously selecting at the end of round 1 aren't going to have the big, household name prospects, but I think they drafted a couple of key players that, well, in Keon's case, he's going to be a starter. Cole Bishop will eventually be a solid player for this team, and again, Ray Davis is going to play critical snaps as a rookie. He's probably going to have 100 carries as a rookie, I would imagine. So I like this draft class a lot, and I think they're going to have a pretty substantial rookie impact, especially for how late they selected in the 1st round, or trading out of the 1st round. But my point is they're going to have pretty substantial rookie impact for how late their 1st pick in the draft was. The Buffalo Bills schedule is pretty difficult, and I think there is going to be a bit of a transition period, without Diggs, without Gabe Davis, and in the long run, I don't think the Bills are going to be completely lost without those guys, as mentioned during the offensive part of the video, but I think there may be a bit of a transition period with Curtis Samuel, with Khalil Shakir stepping up, and with Keon Coleman adjusting to the NFL level. Now, their first 3 games are against the Cardinals, Dolphins, and Jags, and I think they'll go 2-1 during that stretch. 3-0 isn't out of the question, but weeks 4 through 6 is where the big test for Buffalo is going to be, as they go to Baltimore in week 4, go to Houston in week 5, and go to New York to play the Jets in week 6. And those 3 road games are going to be a big test, because if they don't go 3-0 to start the year, there's a non-zero chance that this team would fall to 2-4. I think this team is far too talented to be 1-5, but that's, how big of a deal those weeks 1 through 3 are. Now, what I will say positively about Buffalo is once this team gets to the postseason, I don't really worry. I mean, from a seeding aspect, unless they are the 7 seed and they play Kansas City in the first round, which would be an extremely difficult game for anybody, not just Buffalo. But as long as Buffalo gets to the postseason, which I think they will, and even for the losses they had last year, I think it would be crazy to say that the Bills can't get to the postseason. They're going to be a very tough out. Now, just because of how difficult their schedule is, because down the stretch they play teams like the Chiefs, the 49ers, the Lions, and even those first 6 games are not going to be easy. I don't think Buffalo will win the AFC East, so that may be a bold take, but I think Buffalo will finish right around 10-7, which again, I do think will be good enough to get into the postseason. And in the AFC, that's really all that matters. I think the home field can be, I mean, yes, it's an advantage. I don't want that to be mistaken, but I think it can be a little lost at times, and I think there's too much of a focus on, well, if they don't win the division, then there's absolutely zero chance this team can get to the Super Bowl. And it's incredibly tough to get to a single Super Bowl, let alone get to multiple, and it's going to be tough for the Bills to get there this year. Now, if I had to put a team ceiling on the 2024 Bills, I think it would be an AFC Championship game appearance. They have not been to the AFC Championship game since back in 2020, and if they get there this year, I think that would be an incredibly successful season, but this conference is loaded, the Bills' schedule is incredibly difficult, and I don't think they're going to get to the Super Bowl this year. 2025, they may, but with as much roster turnover as they had from last year to this year, while I don't think they're going to be a 7-10 team, I think that would be outright crazy to say, I think they're going to be a AFC Championship game max. So that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. Please comment below how far you think the Bills will go this year, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.